Okay, great. Hi, this is Kristen Fisher with Fox News, and thank you so much. I know you've been answering a lot of questions today, so I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to me as well.
Hey, Kristen, how are you?
I'm doing great. So I know it's probably not the right stuff to ask an astronaut what he's feeling, but I'm going to start with that anyway. uh, After all of this time, I mean, you've had this 9-year, nearly a decade-long wait. You're now less than a month away from this launch. What does it feel like?
Well, it's exciting. It's a little surreal based on everything that's going on in the world right now, but also a long road, as you mentioned. I got back from STS-135 in July of 2011, and then, of course, as you know from your parents, there's a post-flight process, but then late in the fall of 2011, I started working as part of the commercial crew program and have kind of been working on it ever since. And 8.5 years ago to now, it's in some ways it's gone by very fast, and in other ways it's been a long road for sure.
I bet. And so now here we are, and part of this decade has been about building NASA's partnership, this public-private partnership with SpaceX. What has it been like to work with SpaceX over the last decade or so, and how confident are you that they have built a spacecraft that is going to be able to deliver for you in a month?
Yeah, it's been an honor, it's been a challenge, and it's been incredibly exciting to work with SpaceX. They are an incredible company. Just the way they do business, how quickly they turn things around, how innovative they can be. It's just been amazing. Bob and I have worked with both Boeing and SpaceX starting at about 5 years ago, and then when we were officially selected to fly the SpaceX flight about 2 years ago, we've essentially been living out in the Los Angeles area, helping to support those folks and our NASA counterparts working on Crew Dragon. And so it's been very much a whirlwind, and in some ways it's like we've been working heads down for so long. It's hard to believe we've gotten to the point where we're going to launch here in just a few short weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, and every test pilot's dream is to fly a new spaceship.
I can't hear.
I would imagine. Can you hear me now?
You can turn your the knob up on your.
Can you hear me okay?
Box.
Hold on just a second, Kristen.
There,
Sure.
just turn that
There.
there. Talk to have them talk to you.
Kristen, can you talk for a second?
I hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, that's a little better.
I'm talking right now. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you a lot better now. It was got a little
All
bit
right.
soft. Go
I
ahead.
can talk a lot louder if that helps.
No, that's
Okay.
perfect now. Thank you.
So every test pilot's dream is to fly a new spaceship, and you're about to fly one of the slickest looking spacecraft ever made, in my humble opinion. How excited are you to fly it?
Oh, we're beyond excited. We both talked about this before. It's when you start flying airplanes, you're looking to fly those sleek fighters, and then for me personally, the next big thing was to fly the space shuttle, and was lucky enough to get to do that. And then now this Crew Dragon, the folks at SpaceX have just they put everything into this vehicle, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it's a pretty cool looking vehicle, and my 10-year-old son certainly thinks it's a cool vehicle with a cool name, Dragon. So I got the thumbs up from him, and in the end, that's all that matters.
Yeah. So the Trump administration has been very committed, as you know, to Can you hear me okay?
No, the volume's not working at all now.
Oh, no. Testing.
Yeah,
1, 2, 3. You hear me okay? Mic check. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you that over here.
Mic check. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, Kristen, we have you
1,
just
2,
barely
3.
audible. I think we're going to try to switch out equipment. We've had an issue.
You want me to keep talking or hang tight? Okay, sure.
Let's plug this other one in.
Okay, Kristen, try talking now.
Oh, wait a second.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
We got you now, Kristen. I think we had
Okay,
we had
great.
an equipment failure.
Better to have it now than on May 27th.
That is, better words have not been spoken.
Okay, so I'm going to pick it back up here. The Trump administration has been very committed to maintaining American dominance in space. How do you think this moment, this launch, will help achieve that objective?
Well, I think this is the first step is to regain U.S. launch capability to low Earth orbit, and we're on the verge of doing that. And then I think longer term, we've made a commitment with going back to the moon with the Artemis program. We just saw the human lander system selection yesterday, which was very exciting. So just seeing that we are building to this public-private partnership on this grand scale of going back to the moon and then ultimately going to Mars is it's an extremely exciting time right now to be in the space business and at NASA.
And so you could be in the running to be on one of those missions, right? The return to the moon mission?
Well, I have been an astronaut now for almost 20 years, and for me, my focus is entirely on successfully completing this mission with Bob. After that, there are a whole host, as I'm sure your parents can both tell you, a whole host of folks that not only are capable but are deserving to go to the moon, and I almost feel like I want to be there to kind of be their cheerleader at this point. But it would be an incredible experience, obviously, for anybody to set foot on the moon again, and then ultimately set foot on Mars. And whether I'm part of it or not, I will certainly be the biggest supporter.
And what do you want the American public to know? I feel like there has been a lull in excitement for, the American space program, which has really been building back up over the last few years with commercial crew and with all the things that we have been talking about. But for those holdouts who don't understand why they should tune in and watch when you all launch on the 27th, what would you say to them? Why is this so exciting and so important?
Well, I think, every part of the space program brings such dividends to society. The technology development alone, and then the inspiring of a next generation of science researchers or engineers or medical professionals. It just kind of goes full circle when we launch from America with a rocket built in America completely from bottom to top by an American company who's only been flying vehicles for the last decade or so. And to me, that is a success story straight out of the movies, from an American success story. And so I think, and just seeing U.S. Astronauts launching from Florida again, I think will excite a lot of people. Unfortunately, most are going to have to do it virtually on a screen, but we know that they'll be there with us in spirit, and we're glad to be part of that opportunity to bring this capability back to the United States.
Great, Doug. Thank you so much. Good luck. Godspeed. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you so much, Kristen. It was great talking with you.
Bye.
I'm going to jump right in because I know we have limited time. Doug, you have had a jam-packed few weeks training and preparing for this mission. You've been shuttling between Texas, California, Florida. Can you describe for us what the preparation for this mission has been like and how it differs from missions of the past?
That's a great question. Hello, Rachel. I think the differences for this mission is in the sense, when we trained for shuttle missions, the training was very, very regimented and established because we were flying some of the later missions on shuttle. So we knew exactly what we would be doing for every training event. And then for this mission in general, Bob and I have helped to kind of create the training that would be required to fly the Crew Dragon to ISS and back. So part of it has been very much a developmental effort and a collaboration with the teams both at NASA and at SpaceX to build the training and what training scenarios we would need to be successful and to be able to fly the vehicle properly. And so it's been kind of a little bit of a mix of a lot of different things as far as that goes. Not only developing the training, but also developing the displays and kind of the inner workings of the Crew Dragon capsule.
Now, Doug, the Demo-2 mission is hardly the first time you're putting your life on the line. You've been to space twice. You were a test pilot before that. But humans have never flown in this spacecraft before. So is this mission inherently riskier than others?
I think, it is almost kind of discussed that a first flight of a vehicle could be a little more risky, but I think by the same token, we've had a huge amount of effort from the folks in Hawthorne at SpaceX, as well as their testing facility at McGregor, Texas, and down in Florida, as well as the Commercial Crew Program folks at NASA have worked absolutely tirelessly over the last several years to ensure that all those things are considered and the design is considered and tested thoroughly before they're going to put people on the vehicle. So from a first flight standpoint, certainly there might be some greater quantifiable risk to some degree, but probably no different than any other space flight that we have flown humans on before in that regard.
Now, the last time NASA launched humans on a new spacecraft was in the 80s. You're making history here. So what's the significance of being the first?
Well, I think it's, I think as a race, we like firsts and, people like to be first and those kinds of things. So I think, it's being given that identifying attachment to the flight, and it certainly is a first flight of a crew on Crew Dragon, and so I think for us, as test pilots, Bob and I, if you told us when we were students at test pilot school that we would get an opportunity not only to fly a new developmental aircraft, which we both were able to do while we were test pilots, but then get to fly the first flight of a spaceship, I think we would have told you were crazy. And we're just, obviously thankful for the opportunity. It's been a ton of work by a lot of folks all over the United States to get us to this point, and a lot of sacrifice. And we just are looking forward to the next few weeks and launching this vehicle into space and getting it to ISS.
Now, Doug, you piloted the last shuttle mission back in 2011. You're now slated to be the first commander of its replacement, the Crew Dragon. There's something quite poetic about that, the fact that you were, in the pilot seat for the end of an era, and now you're commanding, you're in that seat to usher in a new generation of space flight, manned space flight. So has the significance of that sunk in for you?
People mention it quite a bit, both publicly and privately, and I certainly understand that. It's kind of neat because for me, because it has been such a long road, and it's kind of been a journey, a personal journey right along with NASA's journey to kind of transition from the space shuttle era to this next era of space flight for NASA and the United States for that matter. And so I just, it's hard to believe in some ways. When somebody says it, you're like, well, that can't possibly be me, but it looks like it's going to be. So, we just try to, we take it on board just like anything else, and probably do a lot more thinking about it when we get back than now. I think, we're certainly focused on our jobs, to make this a very successful mission for SpaceX and for NASA, and also to help Chris Cassidy out on board Space Station, because he's up there in the U.S. segment all by himself right now with 2 Russian crewmates. So, it's kind of those things that we're looking at, but it's certainly a huge honor to even be, to get to fly to space one time, but to be, on the last shuttle flight and then the first flight since then is only in America, I guess I would say.
Now, Doug, the Space Shuttle had over 2,000 switches and circuit breakers, and Crew Dragon has touchscreens and far fewer switches. And if all goes to plan, the flight will be mostly automated. So does that make your job of flying this thing a little bit easier, this new generation of spacecraft?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rachel. I think in some ways it does, because you can you're more of a monitor of all the systems, and you're not using all your brain power to actually fly the vehicle. Now, that being said, and as we talked about previously, the vehicle has manual capability in several phases, and we will certainly test that out, because it's just prudent to have an automated vehicle that has a backup capability manually in order to do what you need to do to complete the mission. And so it's just part and parcel with the way the vehicles are developed. But hopefully it will make our job easier. And it's similar to what our Russian counterparts fly. The Soyuz is a mostly automated vehicle, but it does have manual backup capability as well. And I think it's the way vehicles are being developed for the future. And I think it's the right way to fly vehicles in space. And so hopefully that'll be the answer that we'll come back with.
Well, Doug, I look forward to being on the grounds there in Florida and watching you take this historic flight. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was so good to talk to you, Rachel.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks, Doug, for doing this. And I'm sure you've had a pretty busy day, so I guess we'll just jump right into this. I assume your schedule from now until launch day is packed with more last-minute training, and it's probably going to be equally crazy. So just give me a rundown of what that looks like, and let me know if you are going to have any personal time too to do anything you wanted to do before you go to space. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we talked a little bit about this before. Obviously, today is mostly focused on the media aspects of it, which is, great to get to talk to a lot of different folks around the country. Next week, we have 2 days of SpaceX sims or simulations that we'll do here in the Houston area. SpaceX has a facility here with a simulator, which makes it really nice. Then we'll have about a 7-day period, what we call a rest period, which is kind of something that the folks that fly on Soyuz have. It's your last chance to kind of take a break, spend some time with family, and get everything in order because you're going to be in space for a while. And so that can't come at a better time because, as you mentioned, we've been going at it pretty hard for the last couple years, and Bob and I have spent probably more time in California working with the folks at SpaceX in Hawthorne than we have spent at home. So that'll be a nice break even under the the current circumstances. We'll be able to get to spend some time with our families and kind of recharge our batteries before that final 2-week push to our launch. Once we get after the rest week, we will do some proficiency simulators, and we will do some other proficiency training to some degree, and then it's a lot of as we call them, cats and dog items to kind of get taken care of before we head down to Florida about a week prior to our launch. And then once we're down in Florida, we'll go through the dry dress activity as well as some other items with the SpaceX folks, and then obviously we'll hope to launch on May 27th.
Cool. And a quick follow-up to that.
Yeah.
I know you guys do routine quarantines before you go to space. Do you also train in those quarantines, or is that a time to kind of meditate, talk to your family remotely?
It actually we will train in quarantine. We did that in shuttle, where we would be isolated from everybody, and we would just go into the simulator, and we essentially would just talk to the mission control or the training team on the loops and not interact with people. And obviously we've essentially been doing that in some way, shape, or form for the last 2 months, just like almost everybody else in this country, as far and frankly around the world. So it's almost like we will have the longest quarantine prior to a spaceflight in probably spaceflight history in some respects. Formally, we start a quarantine process usually 2 weeks prior to launch, and in this case, we'll do it 3 weeks prior.
Gotcha. And so I know your and Bob's mission was extended. Do you know how long it could be? Like, what's the longest you're prepared to stay in space, and how has that affected your training up until now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, as we sit here today, I think the mission duration could be anywhere from a month to 4 months. Is probably the long end of it. It'll likely be somewhere in between those two numbers. From a training aspect, I think obviously when we were first selected for this flight, it was planned to be what we would call a short duration flight, just a case of a week or two dock to space station, and rightly so. We were concentrated exclusively on Dragon, and there was some station refresher, ISS refresher training that we did along those lines, as we started formally training for this mission about 2 years ago. And then the decision was made, I think as Steve Stitch talked about earlier today, they started discussing lengthening the mission last fall, and then from our standpoint, it became an official type thing, at least as far as the training aspect was concerned, early this year. And so at that point, we started doing more significant station training along with all the other things we were doing with SpaceX. So what was a very busy enterprise before became a hugely busy one, because I had to get some training to be recertified on the robotic arm, and Bob had to do a similar series of events with spacewalk training, and then just the other generic space station training that we either did kind of an abbreviated flow prior. We had to get a little more emphasis and a little deeper down from the trainer's perspective in order to be a little bit better long duration functioning crew member and to be a help to Chris Cassidy rather than having him have to fix all the messes that we made while we're on space station. So it's been and that's really what we want to do. Chris is even if we launch on time on the 27th, he'll have been up there kind of as a single U.S. crew member for a couple months. So we want to definitely go up there and kind of help him out and be part of the solution rather than part of his problem. So and then of course we also have a fair amount of things to do with Dragon while we're docked to make sure that it does all the things it's supposed to do, while it's docked to space station. So, just a lot of extra stuff in the last few months, and then, we add a pandemic to it on top of it. So it's amazing how the teams have adjusted and flexed and continued to work towards this launch despite everything going on around us.
Yeah, definitely. So this is a test mission, and this is a new crew vehicle. What contingencies have you prepared for that you wouldn't prepare for other missions, and how does that kind of influence your outlook on this whole mission as you prepare for it?
Yeah, I think frankly, when we flew shuttle, we trained extensively on contingencies, and this vehicle, it's no different. The mechanism, with which I think we have those contingencies is certainly different because it's a different vehicle, but we practice all those same types of contingencies, whether it's a depressurization event, whether it's a fire event, whether it's an abort off the pad, whether it's an abort in space, whether it's a emergency undocking from space station because something happened on space station, and you name it, and that in the sense is those same types of events that we practiced and simulated on shuttle. We're certainly doing those same things with Dragon, albeit the procedures are different. The way the vehicle reacts is somewhat different in some cases, or what you would do in those eventualities is different. But the preparation, I would say, is very similar, albeit we in many cases we're part of the development of those procedures with this vehicle because this is the first time.
Yep, awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it, and good luck on your flight.
Hey, it's great talking with you. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
I'm like, I didn't need to do all that.
Hey, Doug, Bill Harwood, CBS News up at the Kennedy Space Center. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, Bill. How have you been?
I'm doing great. It's really fun talking to you again. I'm just going to jump right in because we've only got 7 minutes here.
Okay.
Hey, earlier today, Zeb called this flight, and with a little bit of hyperbole, the Stanley Cup, the World Series, the Super Bowl, all rolled into one. And, I was laughing a little bit, but I think he has a point in the sense that in troubled times, the space program has given hope to Americans. I'm thinking about STS-1, return to flight, John Glenn's mission. I mean, obviously you guys have been training for this for years, but does it take on new meaning now, given that the country's in the grip of this pandemic, this crisis?
I kind of feel like it does to some degree. I hope it does, and I think that's kind of what we've kind of talked about it before. Is it does offer that hope to folks that science can overcome, science can figure out a way, and if we do offer that to some people and do brighten up their day by watching the launch from home, I think it's a win-win. I also think, from Zeb's perspective, the other part of this for us is this is, at least on paper, this is the test flight for Crew Dragon. Mike and Victor and Shannon and Suichi is classified as an operational flight. So, from the standpoint of, we've got to dot all the I's, cross all the T's from the test standpoint, I think Zeb probably implied that to a degree too. We've got to kind of, do a full checkout of this vehicle end to end and then hand it off, so to speak, to those guys for the first operational mission.
And let me just rapidly change gears to some nuts and bolts. We talked about this at the news conference, but I've seen 9 knots listed as the maximum allowable wind for a splashdown based on structural limits and stuff. That seems like a really high bar, given sea states all the way up the coast. I know you have an exclusion zone in the North Atlantic, but it just strikes me that having all that come together and get cleared for launch is really going to be a challenge. I mean, it strikes me as more challenging than shuttle. Would you think so?
I think it certainly has that potential, and I think it's going to work the teams from start to finish. Not only for launch, but I think for landing. Figuring out that, the placard for our vehicle is slightly less than that it's intended to be for follow-on vehicles, but that was a kind of a trade made early on, or maybe not early on, but in the last year or two, to have the vehicle with the structural limits that ours has fly on Demo 2, and that definitely is going to be a challenge for all the teams, and I think that's part of the equation that will go into the duration as well. Is you need to find a weather window this summer that makes sense, and so you can get us back down in that placarded limit.
Back in the shuttle days, I know you guys could at least in theory fly a manual abort. Is there anything you guys can do manually in Crew Dragon in an abort scenario, or are you strictly along for the ride at that point?
Once we pull the handles, which we can do, we can do a manual abort, certainly from a crew perspective. At that point, we're hands off through the rest of the abort. There's also the ability to deploy drogues and deploy mains if that necessity comes up. But the in-between part, Bill, is all up to physics.
Understood.
Yeah.
And I was struck by your discussion earlier today about flying the ship with a touchscreen. I like to race cars on my son's PlayStation, but I can't do it with a controller. I have to use the steering wheel. In an emergency, are you comfortable using a touchscreen when you're going to be subjected to vibration, the heightened awareness, I'll call it, in an emergency?
Yeah,
how would that work?
Yeah, it's certainly a good question. I think, and Bob characterized it, I believe, unfortunately some of this is starting to run together for us, but it's the relative velocity between the vehicles, and when and for example, the docking example where you're flying manually, the Dragon does not have manual capability beyond the deorbit burn, so you wouldn't be flying it manually for an entry. It's got multiple modes of redundancy in an automated capacity. So the biggest challenge manually flying the vehicle with the touch screen is for a failed automated docking where you would take over manually. And that has been pretty well bounded. And once again, similar to shuttle and other vehicles, the rates are not necessarily something that is hugely dynamic compared to, say, an ascent or an entry, where it was fairly challenging with the shuttle to fly those types of profiles. So I feel pretty confident that if we were in that situation, and obviously we will test that situation at a greater distance from station, but still on the V-bar, I feel confident that crews, given the training that we had and given the training that future crews will get, they would be able to fly the vehicle manually to a docking.
Maybe my last question, I'm about out of time.
Yep.
I was going to ask what's the most demanding part of this mission for you, but I think I'd rather squeeze this one in. How confident are you that this spacecraft is going to do what you need it to do? And I'm saying that in the sense that over the past year there have been some, a fairly dramatic incident here at the Cape last year when one of these things blew up. I know they've addressed that, but it is a new vehicle. And what is your confidence level in the SpaceX Crew Dragon that you're going to be trusting your life to?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, my confidence comes with the teams, with the people that have been working on this vehicle. And the other part of the confidence, I think, comes from experiencing the Demo 1 mission and experiencing the in-flight abort mission and how the teams performed. I've got great confidence in Kathy Leaders and Steve Stitch and their team and the commercial crew program, and of course the folks that we worked with almost daily out at SpaceX for the last 2 years, to get the vehicle to this point. And I certainly acknowledge there have been challenges on, not only for SpaceX but for Boeing as well, and that's part and parcel, I believe, with a developmental program, especially one, where we're developing a spaceship. And so, yeah, my confidence is high that we will be successful. I'm confident that this is going to be a good system for future crews to use. And I think we're, after 5 years of, every day working on this program, I think Bob and I are only two of many people that are ready to get this thing airborne.
Well, they hadn't told me to stop, so I'll ask you one more.
Okay.
What's the most demanding part of this mission from your perspective as a pilot? You and Bob both.
Yeah, it's another good question, Bill. I think generally is just to be ahead of the vehicle, and that it's a little bit cliche, I think, in a lot of ways, but I think for me is completely understanding the mission profile and then being very, very well versed on everything that we're going to, not only are the vehicle's going to do, but what we are going to do during the mission, all the way to docking, and then obviously the undock and entry, descent, and landing. And the other part of it is, I think, is just the unknown for how much time we're going to spend on space station. And I think that's more of a human element, and we go in it knowing that it could be 30 days up to 4 months, and it'll probably end up somewhere in between that. But that's certainly an unknown from a personal standpoint that you'd like to maybe have a little bit better answer for. But we certainly realize the reasons why, and I think hopefully we'll be able to offer some good support to Chris Cassidy, who's up there in the U.S. segment on his own right now.
Well, Doug, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you down here at the Cape, and best wishes.
Thank you, Bill. I really appreciate it, and I'll hopefully see you in a few weeks.
Take care.
Good job.
Hey, hello, Doug. I'm looking out my window at your launch pad. Thanks for taking the time today. Earlier, you described yourself as a little bit of old school when it came to rocket ships, and man, you've got the coolest spaceship, cool suits, and you're taking Teslas to the pad now. Man, how do you figure that, and how cool is all this wrapped into one?
It is really neat, and I think the biggest testament to that is my 10-year-old son telling me how cool I am now. So I think that in itself is probably worth it. But yeah, SpaceX has gone all out as far as the visual aspects of the vehicle, and they've worked equally as hard to make the innards and the displays and everything else with the vehicle work to perfection. And so, yeah, we're looking forward to giving it its test run here in just a few weeks.
So tell me, are you going to be able to drive yourself to the launch pad in the Tesla, or are you going to be chaperoned?
Oh, we will be fully chaperoned. Yeah, we're in the second seats or the back seats when we go out there, and yeah, we've got a couple great folks from SpaceX driving us out to the pad, and we're looking forward to seeing them again. We did kind of a dress rehearsal of launch day a few months ago. Probably been several months now. I'm sorry, it runs together to some degree, but yeah, it was neat to kind of do that just the way we're going to do it here in just a few short weeks.
Well, you personally are the bookends to the last human flight from Kennedy and the first flight going back, which puts you in a very unique position in history. Talk about that a little. I mean, I don't know of any other program where to end and begin close a gap. Here you are, you personally. Talk a little bit about that, and did you see this also as a race against Boeing in any way?
Well, to answer your first question, I think, yeah, I certainly consider myself very lucky professionally to have been in a situation where I was selected to fly an STS-135 and had the honor of flying with 3 great crewmates, and just it was just an incredible experience to be part of that last shuttle flight and to fly with the crew I did. I just still to this day, think about the things that happened during that flight and lead up to that flight and the post-flight, and it'll just be just a huge amount of memories for me. After that flight, if somebody had told me, guess what, you'll fly the first vehicle that next launches from the same pad that takes astronauts to the space station, I would have laughed at them. That's probably the least I would have done. I would have just not believed it. And so I think part of it is just, it just was a path to get to this point was interesting, and I think the agency went through some challenges after the shuttle program ended, and the astronaut office went through some challenges in trying to get this, figure out what exactly we're going to do in space from a launch vehicle perspective, and then beyond low Earth orbit and all those things, and 8.5, 9 years later to see where we are, not only getting ready to fly the first commercial crew vehicle to the space station, but with crew on it, but also the follow-on Artemis program and all the excitement that that's bringing to potentially go back to the moon in a few short years. You would have never thought after we landed at Atlantis back in 2011 that 9 years later we would be where we are in some ways, and it's better than I would have imagined in so many.
But do you see this as a race with Boeing, and did you have a wager with Chris Ferguson?
Yeah, no, we didn't have a wager, but I think for me personally, and probably for Chris, most fighter pilots are very competitive by nature, so we maybe silently had a competition between each other to some degree, but I think we also realized the bigger picture is to get that capability with 2 vehicles, 2 non-redundant vehicles, 2 completely different vehicles, the capability to launch astronauts to the space station is very valuable. And it's kind of one of those win-win circumstances. And when Boeing gets ready to go fly their crewed mission, it'll be also a very great day for that organization as well as for NASA. And to establish U.S. crew vehicles, rotating crews regularly is the ultimate goal on Space Station.
Over the months, how much personal time have you had with Elon Musk, and what personal assurances has he given you directly about his rocket ship and its safety for you and Bob?
We see Elon fairly regularly. Of course, he's obviously very, very busy, just like we are. And, we probably the last time we talked to him was at the in-flight abort test down in Florida. And we've talked to him, many times in between and since. And I think the thing that resonated with me the most is on more than one occasion he has looked both Bob and I right in the eye and said, hey, if there's anything you guys are not comfortable with or that you're seeing, please tell me, and we'll fix it. And he has done that on more than one occasion. And not only Elon, but many folks in the company, right down to the folks that are working on the engines, on the manufacturing floor, everybody out there, knows that they're putting two fellow human beings on the end of the rocket and flying them to the space station, and they go out of their way to say hi to us when we're out there at the factory. And at least before the pandemic, it's been a little tougher since then, obviously. But it's just, I kind of feel like they are working. That's what it's all about for them, is the crew safety aspect, and then obviously, providing the United States with the capability to go to and from the space station.
And last question for me: will your wife and son be able to actually come to Kennedy for the launch? Or I know you said families and friends will be staying away, but what about your wife and son?
Right now, it looks like they should be able to go because they have been quarantined for as long as most of us that have been doing this for the last couple months. Almost the whole country has been quarantined in some sense. So right now, it looks like yes, they will be able to go, and we'll do our best, and NASA and the flight docs will do their best to make sure that we're all safe and quarantined, and I think it's a great gesture from NASA to be able to have your family there. It's hugely important, and for them as much as it is for me, and I really appreciate that the efforts that they're making to make that possible.
Thank you, Doug. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doug. We have a mutual friend, Steve Ganyard, and he contributed this first question. He says, what's your call sign, and how did you come by it?
We don't have time to talk about that here. Did you ask him what his first call sign was?
Yes, he has two of them as far as I understand.
He does.
Babyface and Spike.
I remember also a sweet pea in there as well, so maybe he's not being completely honest with you. But make sure you tell them I said hey.
I will do that. So I'm going to start with this because it is history, even though you are very, I think, shy about claiming to be a hero on this. But how do you think historians will define this mission?
Oh gosh, I don't know. The ultimate goal for us as astronauts and test pilots is just to go up there and prove out the vehicle, prove out the mission, not make a mistake that would jeopardize the mission, and to bring the vehicle home safely. And then depending on how long we're up there, to do our best to help Chris Cassidy manage the space station and all the tasks that are required of crews these days on space station and all the work that needs to be done. So I think that's probably the long and the short of it, at least near term. I think long term, you let historians make those judgments that they're going to make, and go from there. It's certainly an honor to be part of it. Be part of the end of the shuttle program and the start of this program, and just want to do our best to be successful on this mission, because there's just been so many people that have worked so hard to get us to this point.
We talked about this a little bit earlier. It looks like your daddy's Apollo capsule, but it's not. So tell us about the capsule as a design and how this is new and improved over Apollo.
Well, I think it's new and improved in just the components that they use and the technology that we have. I mean, the generic design of a capsule is roughly the same. Certainly, it's not as large as the Apollo capsule was, I believe, but it's close. But just the way that the technology has developed since Apollo, since the 50 years that it has evolved. The flat screens, the computing power, and then just the way the thrusters are designed, the guidance and navigation and control is designed, the sensors on board, all those things are obviously state of the art relative to even what we flew on shuttle, and SpaceX has worked very hard at refining that design from the cargo Dragon to what we see with Crew Dragon.
We know Dragon has its challenges. I mean, with shuttle, you worried about foam, and I watched you in Building 9 with your crew train for a shuttle for escape. It was a very lengthy process. Mm-hmm. But Dragon aboard is different. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, as we did talk about a little bit, the capsule design and the launch escape system allows you throughout the launch phase of flight, literally from the launch pad to the rocket shuts off, you've got abort capability with this vehicle. And the system is a number of Super Draco jets that are incorporated into the capsule, and it thrusts you away, as we saw on the in-flight abort test a few months ago, away from the launch vehicle. And then it initiates essentially a similar sequence, depending on the altitude of the abort, a similar sequence that you would go through on a normal entry, where the vehicle separates from the trunk and then rights itself heat shield into the wind, and then the drogues deploy, and then finally the mains deploy. So it's a incredibly neat capability. And it's obviously a very good one if it covers all the envelope, where shuttle had some what we call black zones, where you did not have escape capability throughout the launch envelope.
So the hashtag for this mission is Launch America. What does that mean to you as an astronaut and a test pilot? It's been a long 9 years.
It really has, but it's also been rewarding in a sense that you start from essentially an idea that NASA had to have private companies essentially build the vehicles completely on their own. Obviously, NASA is involved with that process from an insight and oversight perspective, but a little bit different than what we traditionally used to do developing vehicles, whether it is fighter, aircraft, or spaceships. So it has been a long 9 years in many respects, and especially the last several, because that's when we had down selected the two companies and really had to make these vehicles work. And both companies, and of course the folks within the Commercial Crew Program here at NASA, really had to work hard with both companies to get them to a point where they could launch their uncrewed flights. And so, yeah, from Bob and I's perspective, especially the last 2 years where we spent the majority of our time at the Hawthorne facility that SpaceX has in California, doing the work that we were doing, it's been a long road those last 2 years, because we spent a lot of it in hotel rooms out in California.
So how inspiring is it working for a visionary like Elon Musk?
Well, I think just working with the folks at SpaceX, you know, it just the enthusiasm and the capability and the agility technically that the company has it still amazes me how quickly we can adjust. You know, we worked on some display manual piloting display interfaces a few years ago, and we would fly the simulator during the day and make our suggestions and offer some changes, and then literally the next morning we would be flying those changes in the simulator, and that really is amazing, and still to this day it surprises me how quickly we could do some things. And obviously there are other things that take longer. Developing a spaceship is not a short process, but you know, just the enthusiasm and how hard those folks work, and how hard the folks that are in our Commercial Crew Program have worked to get us literally 3 weeks away from launching is you know, I cannot possibly overstate that, how hard it has been to get to this point, just with the amount of effort that we've had to do, especially with two companies rather than just one.
Thank you, Doug. Godspeed.
Thank you so much, Gina. Say hi to Spike for me.
Will do.
Hello. Hey, Tom.
Hi, Justin.
Hey, it's great to speak with you today. Thanks so much for your time. I wonder if you could start out by talking a little bit about the differences between these two vehicles, as far as you understand the Starliner and SpaceX, and sort of, are they more alike or more different, or any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, generically, they're both capsules. Both companies went with a capsule design. The Crew Dragon is slightly larger, in size, so that's probably the biggest difference. And of course, the visual differences are somewhat obvious, but I think other differences is the Crew Dragon has the touch screens that I think people have talked about, whereas Starliner has the edge key screens. They're very state-of-the-art screens, but it's an edge key type manipulation rather than a touch screen. But I think having been involved with this for the last 5 years, it's been part of the rewarding aspect of this process to get to this point is seeing how each company solved particular problems, and some they got very similar solutions and some very different but equally effective, and I think that in itself was pretty neat to see. And then of course, for the last 2 years I had to kind of forget all about Starliner completely and dive deep into the Crew Dragon side of things. So I'm certain things have changed somewhat since then as well.
Yeah. In the early days of Commercial Crew, did you personally have a preference for one of these vehicles, or were you just excited about the opportunity equally to be on either one?
Well, I think when we were selected, the four of us were selected initially. That Sonny and Eric and Bob and I think I probably, like most astronauts, you're just happy to be on the team, so to speak, and have been selected at all for the opportunity to fly one of those two vehicles. And I think, honestly, I'm very happy where we ended up. It's been really exciting to work with SpaceX. It's just a younger workforce, relatively speaking, than I think you see in a lot of places. And they're very excited about what they do. There's just some incredibly talented people out there, and I think either way I would have been immensely thrilled. But I'm certainly glad to have had the opportunity to work with the folks at SpaceX, and of course to get to fly with Bob as well.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about something that you had mentioned earlier when you were speaking about dealing with Elon Musk and him telling you to raise any concerns or issues that you had, and he would change it. What were some of those things that you or Bob raised during this entire process that had to be addressed?
Well, I think in general, I don't honestly think there was anything specific just to us that was raised. And what I mean by that is, there were folks at SpaceX looking at different design trades and challenges, and there were folks within the Commercial Crew program that identified certain things. And you can go back to the beginning where, there was some challenges involved with the way SpaceX wanted to do the fueling of the vehicle while we were in the vehicle. And,
right.
NASA worked through those issues with SpaceX and vice versa, and we got to the bottom of it, and people got comfortable with the way they did their fueling for their vehicle. And I think that's part of the process of developing new, whether it's aircraft or spacecraft, which I can at least speak a little bit about in both cases, is that, initially there is a people get to a loggerhead where they philosophically disagree, and part of it is potentially past experience, and part of it is just not understanding the design to a degree, and you work through those. And we've had those challenges on the SpaceX side. We've had them with parachutes, we've had them with engines, we've had them with the launch vehicle, and they've had similar challenges on the Boeing side, I'm sure, and that's just part of the process. And I think, the way that the teams work together is what I appreciated the most. When SpaceX was having a challenge, they were very much open to say, hey, look, this is what we saw on this particular flight, or with this particular test, or with this particular parachute test or engine test. whatever the case may be, and these are the things we're going to look at it. And then once they identified those issues, it is an incredible process to watch them testing it to the nth degree to resolve it or redesign it. Maybe that was the case, but I honestly don't remember anything that I think we by ourselves identified that was something that, hey, we maybe need to take a better look at this. It was certainly a team effort on all sides, but by the same token, it certainly is reassuring to have the person who actually runs the company, basically tell you that, hey, I want you guys to be comfortable. I want you guys to be satisfied, and that certainly is, was greatly appreciated by, both Bob and I.
Sure. On your particular test flight later this month, is there any area where you think there will be sort of, for lack of a better term, greater learnings or greater testing in any phase of the flight than maybe others, be it launch or docking or entry descent?
That's a good question. I think from our standpoint right now, it's a first flight with people on it, so you kind of have to be ready for everything in a sense, but I don't think there's one phase of flight that maybe offers maybe more of a challenge than another from our perspective. I think they're all going to be challenging, but we also expect all of them to go pretty well like the Demo 1 mission went. The differences between the Demo 1 and the Demo 2 mission primarily is that there's 2 people on board, which is obviously that's a significant one, but then the duration that will be docked. A lot of the other things were at least proven one time on the Demo 1 mission, and then of course some other aspects of a contingency were covered in the in-flight abort mission. So we've seen the teams in action at SpaceX and in Mission Control in Houston, and we've done a lot of work with those different teams depending on the phase of flight and simulations. And I think our primary expectation is we go through this test flight and then ultimately get it certified so that we can do a full duration crew rotation with Mike Hopkins and Victor Glover and Shannon and Soichi on the Crew 1 flight, hopefully later this summer.
Yeah, great. Well, hey, I appreciate all the time, and great luck on the flight.
Hey, I really appreciate it, Justin. Take care.
Thanks.